The battlefield was silent, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence after destruction, when smoke covered the sky and the earth smelled of fire. Shadows of broken ships lay scattered across the ground, and bodies of both humans and aliens lay still. The war had ended here, but the planet still burned. Among the ruins walked a man, his steps heavy, his breath weak. His name was Ethan Cross, a soldier of Earth, stranded and alone. His biomask hissed with every breath, the oxygen meter flashing red. Each inhale felt thinner, each second heavier. He knew his mask was failing, and soon he would have nothing left to breathe. Ethan's uniform was torn, his arm bruised, his side bleeding from shrapnel. He had fought for survival, and now he searched for safety. But in this wasteland, safety was only a dream. The ground trembled again as a distant explosion echoed from the horizon. The war might have moved elsewhere, but death still lingered here. He pushed through the dust, moving past the wreckage of a fallen ship. His eyes scanned the area, not for enemies, not for victory, but for hope. And then he heard it, a sound, faint, broken, and strange. It was not human, it was alien, a voice filled with pain, gasping for life. Ethan froze, his hand tightening around his weapon. He remembered the orders. He remembered the stories of what aliens had done to his people. But the sound reached him again, weak, desperate, not a war cry, not anger, but a cry for help. Against every instinct, Ethan followed the sound. He moved through the smoke, stepping over metal shards. And then he saw her, an alien warrior, her armor cracked, her body trapped under heavy debris. Her mask was shattered, her lips trembling as she struggled to breathe. Her glowing eyes flickered, half open, filled with both fear and defiance. Ethan stopped, his heart racing. This was the enemy, the kind his people were told to fear. But here she was, not a monster, not a killer, but a living being fighting to survive. He looked at his own mask, the oxygen warning still flashing red. His air was running out. Her air was already gone. He knew what this meant. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He could turn away, save the last of his oxygen for himself. He could let the alien die and walk on. No one would know. No one would blame him. But something inside him refused. Humanity was not built on hate alone. It was built on choice, on courage. And in this silence, Ethan chose. He dropped his weapon and pushed the debris aside. Each piece cut his hands. Each lift tore at his wounded body. The alien gasped, her eyes widening in surprise. She had expected an enemy's blade, but instead, she found a hand pulling her free. Her chest rose and fell, her lungs desperate, but the air burned her throat. She coughed, choking, her body shaking. Ethan looked at her broken mask, then at his own. His oxygen was almost gone. Hers was already lost. His fingers touched the release valve on his mask. His breath caught as he thought of the cost. But then he remembered why he fought. Not just for humans, not just for victory, but for something greater, for the meaning of being alive. He knelt beside her, his voice rough. "You need this more than I do," he whispered. The alien's glowing eyes widened in disbelief. She could not understand his words, but she felt his intent. With steady hands, Ethan removed his mask and pressed it against her face. The oxygen hissed, flowing into her lungs. Her body arched as life returned to her. The silence of the battlefield deepened. Ethan's chest rose and fell without air. Each second stretched into eternity. The alien stared at him, unable to speak, unable to comprehend. She was the enemy, a stranger, yet he gave her his last breath. Ethan's vision blurred, his strength fading. He leaned back, his lips pale, his lungs empty. But before darkness claimed him, he whispered one last word. "Live." The alien warrior, still weak, still wounded, felt tears burn her eyes. Her kind never cried, but now, something inside her broke. This man, her enemy, had given everything for her. In that moment, she saw not a soldier, not a human, not an enemy, but a being whose heart was stronger than war. The battlefield was silent again. But within that silence, a new story began. The story of sacrifice. The story of a human who gave his last breath to save an alien stranger. And in that silence, legends were born. The battlefield still burned around them, but for Ethan Cross, the fire was fading into shadows. His chest rose weakly, each breath shorter than the last. The oxygen that once kept him alive now flowed into the mask he had placed over the alien warrior's face. The hiss of the filter was the only sound, steady and sharp, a reminder of what he had chosen. The alien warrior gasped, her body shuddering as life returned to her lungs. The air burned at first, but slowly her breathing steadied. Her glowing eyes blinked, adjusting to the broken sky above. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she could breathe without pain. She reached up, touching the mask that was not hers, feeling the warmth of human hands that had left it there. She turned her head and saw him, the human who had freed her, the one who had given her air. He was slumped against the rubble, his skin pale, his lips turning blue. The mask was gone from his face, his chest rising shallowly. She could hear the rattle in his lungs, the silent struggle for breath that no longer came. The alien's heart pounded, a rhythm of confusion and disbelief. Why? She thought. Why would he do this? Her people had taught her that humans were selfish, cruel, destroyers of worlds. But here was proof of the opposite. Here was one who had given everything to a stranger, an enemy. Ethan tried to focus, his eyes half closed. Through blurred vision, he saw her staring, her expression torn between fear and wonder. His lips moved, barely forming words. "Live, even if I can't," he whispered. The sound was soft, almost lost in the smoke, but the meaning was carved into her soul. The alien warrior pressed the mask tighter to her face, the air hissing. Her mind raced, torn between instinct and honor. Her instinct screamed, "Take the mask, survive, leave him." But her honor, the code of her people, now felt hollow compared to what she had seen. No warrior of her clan had ever given breath to another. Yet this human, this fragile creature, had done so without hesitation. She tried to lift him, but his body was heavy, his strength gone. She shouted in her own tongue, a cry filled with frustration and grief. The sound echoed across the ruins, a voice that carried more than pain. It carried a promise. She would not let him die here, not after what he had done. The battlefield around them was still dangerous. Faint lights moved in the distance, enemy patrols searching for survivors. The alien warrior knew she had little time. If they found her with him, they would kill them both. But leaving him behind was no longer possible. The bond created in those few breaths had already changed her heart. With trembling arms, she pulled him close. Her armor scraped against his torn uniform as she carried him across the rubble. Each step was agony for her own wounded body, but she did not stop. His head rested against her shoulder, his skin cold. She could feel the faint pulse in his neck, a fragile flame refusing to go out. The air he had given her still filled her lungs. Every breath she took reminded her of the human sacrifice. She whispered softly, not in words he could understand, but in a vow of her own people. "Your breath is mine now, and with it, I will protect you." They moved through the ruins, shadows falling long under the flickering firelight. Above them, the sky was torn open, revealing stars blurred by smoke. To Ethan, those stars were fading into darkness. To her, those same stars became symbols of something new, a future that neither of their peoples had imagined. The alien warrior's steps slowed, her wounds heavy, but she pushed forward. She had been saved by a human breath, and now she would give him something greater. Not oxygen, not survival, but a chance to live beyond this battlefield, a chance to prove that sacrifice could bridge even the widest divide. As the silence deepened, the battlefield no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something powerful. Two enemies, bound not by war, but by a single breath shared between them. The story of that moment would not die here. It would live as long as she carried him, as long as his sacrifice echoed in her heart. And so, in the ruins of destruction, a new bond was born, not forged by weapons, not by treaties, but by the simplest, purest gift a human could give: life. The alien warrior lay against the cold ruins, her body trembling from the weight of battle and the pain of her wounds. For a long moment she did not move, only listening to the hiss of the human's broken mask, its oxygen fading into silence. Her chest rose and fell steadily now, alive because of him, because of a choice she could never have imagined. Slowly her strength returned, a fire burning in her veins. She opened her eyes fully, the glow within them sharper, brighter, no longer dimmed by suffocation. Her lungs filled with air, and, for the first time since the war began, she felt something she had never felt before: gratitude. But when her gaze fell upon him, slumped and pale, the feeling deepened into something sharper, heavier. The human lay still, his breath shallow, his body broken. His lips were dry, his skin cold, yet his face carried no fear. Even unconscious, his features seemed calm, as though he had accepted his fate the moment he gave her his last breath. The alien warrior stared at him, her mind burning with questions. Why had he done this? Why give life to an enemy? Her people had always spoken of humans as weak and selfish, a race that clung to survival at any cost. They were invaders, destroyers, unworthy of respect. Yet this man had shattered that belief in a single act. He had proved that humanity was not weakness. It was something far greater, a courage born not from strength of body, but strength of heart. The warrior placed her clawed hand on his chest, feeling the faint beat of his heart. It was fragile, like the flutter of a dying bird, but it was there. Her own heart beat faster in response, an unspoken vow forming within her. He had given her breath, and now she would give him survival. With effort, she rose to her feet, her legs weak but steady. Her armor creaked, cracked, and broken, her body aching from wounds. But she ignored the pain and bent down, lifting the human soldier into her arms. His head rested against her shoulder, his weight heavy but not unbearable. She carried him like a fallen brother, though he was something far stranger, an enemy who had become more than enemy. As she walked, the battlefield seemed different. The broken ships and burning wrecks no longer looked like ruins, but like witnesses to what had happened here. The silence of the dead seemed to whisper, as if the world itself recognized the choice that had been made. Her mind drifted to her people, to the stories she would one day tell. Would they believe her if she said a human had saved her life? Would they laugh or call it a lie? Perhaps they would, but it did not matter. Truth lived not in words, but in actions, and she had seen the truth with her own eyes. The warrior's ears twitched at a sound, the distant hum of patrol craft. Enemy forces still searched the area, and if they found her with him, they would show no mercy. She tightened her grip on the human, her jaw set. She had fought for her people before, but now she would fight for him. Her strength no longer belonged only to herself. It belonged to the one who had given her breath. Ethan stirred weakly in her arms, his eyes opening just a little. He looked up at her, his vision clouded, his lips parting to whisper something. No words came out, only a faint exhale. But his eyes held trust, silent and clear. The alien warrior nodded, her voice low and steady. "Rest, human. You are not alone," she whispered in her own tongue, knowing he could not understand, but hoping he could feel. Step by step, she carried him through the smoke. Her body screamed with pain. Yet every time she faltered, she remembered the moment he had placed a mask over her face. That memory gave her strength, a strength beyond her own. Her kind fought for honor, for victory, for pride. But she now fought for something new, something she had never known: loyalty to a stranger. The stars above flickered through the clouds of ash. The war had taken everything from her, her squad, her weapons, her certainty. But in return, the battlefield had given her something else. It had given her a reason to believe that enemies could be more than enemies. That survival was not just about strength, but about sacrifice. And so she walked onward, carrying both their lives in her arms. The warrior who had been saved by a human's last breath, and the human who now depended on her every step. Together they moved across the broken land, neither friend nor foe, but something far greater. A bond forged not in victory, not in defeat, but in the fragile space between life and death. The warrior's eyes glowed brighter as the night deepened. Her soul whispered a vow. She would not let him die here. She would awaken not just as a fighter of her people, but as the guardian of his sacrifice. From this moment forward, her path was no longer her own. It belonged to both of them, bound by a breath, sealed in silence. The night on the ruined battlefield was not quiet anymore. Engines rumbled in the distance, searchlights cut through the smoke, and voices in a harsh alien tongue echoed across the wreckage. Enemy patrols were moving closer, hunting for survivors, finishing the work that the war had already begun. The alien warrior's grip tightened around Ethan Cross as she carried him through the shadows. His body was limp, his breath shallow, yet the faint beat of his heart gave her courage. She could not let him fall here, not after what he had given her. Every step she took was a defiance of death. Every breath she drew was because of him. The glow of the patrol craft passed overhead, their beams sliding across broken ships. The warrior ducked low, pressing herself and Ethan into the shadows of a collapsed wall. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the hum of the machines. If they found her, they would kill them both without hesitation. Her people's code was clear. Mercy was weakness, and weakness had no place in war. But mercy was the only reason she lived now. She looked down at Ethan, his face pale, his lips parted as if whispering a dream. The memory of him pressing the mask to her face burned in her mind. She whispered to herself, "Not weakness, strength." The sound of boots drew closer, sharp against the stone. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw 3 enemy soldiers, armored and armed, scanning the ruins. One carried a torch, its light spilling dangerously close. She held her breath, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of protecting more than herself. When the light almost touched Ethan's face, she acted. Her free hand gripped the blade at her side, the weapon cracked and bloodstained. With a silent step, she slid from the shadows, moving like a ghost. The first soldier barely had time to gasp before her blade silenced him. The second raised his weapon, but her strike was faster. The third tried to shout, but her hand crushed his throat before sound could escape. The bodies fell quietly into the dust, their lifeless eyes staring at the stars. The warrior stood still, her breath heavy, her blade dripping. She looked back at Ethan, still unconscious, still fragile. Her chest tightened, not with pride, but with fear. For the first time, she was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. She cleaned her blade and lifted him again. The patrol craft circled back, its lights sweeping across the ruins. She moved quickly now, weaving through the wreckage, every shadow her ally, every broken wall her shield. But with each step, her strength waned. Her wounds burned, her muscles screamed, yet she forced her body forward. She would not stop, not until he was safe. In the distance, through the smoke, she saw it. A hidden entrance to the underground tunnels, old supply routes buried beneath the battlefield. If she could reach them, she might escape the patrols. Her people once used these tunnels, and she prayed they still stretched far enough to hide them both. She staggered toward the opening, but a shout erupted behind her. More soldiers, their voices rising in alarm. The patrol had found the body she left behind. The glow of weapons flared, beams of deadly light slicing through the darkness. Stones shattered around her as the blasts rained down. The warrior ran, her legs burning. Ethan held tightly in her arms. The tunnel was close, but the soldiers were faster, their fire tearing the ground at her feet. She leapt over broken metal, her heart pounding, her lungs burning. With one final push, she dove into the darkness of the tunnel as energy bolts lit the entrance. The world fell silent again, the sound of battle fading behind. The tunnel was damp, cold, but safe for now. The warrior set Ethan down gently against the wall, her own body collapsing beside him. Her chest heaved, her wounds bleeding freely, but her spirit did not break. She looked at him, his fragile breath still moving his chest. Her hand brushed his forehead, a gesture foreign to her kind but natural now. "You saved me," she whispered softly. "Now I will save you." Above them, the patrols searched the ruins, never knowing that two lives, one human, one alien, had slipped into the shadows. Below, in the dark tunnels, a new bond grew stronger. The escape was not victory, not yet, but it was survival. And survival was enough. For every step forward meant hope, and hope was a weapon stronger than any blade. The alien warrior leaned her back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her. But she did not close her eyes. She would watch over him through the night. She would fight, bleed, and even die if it meant he lived, because his breath was still in her lungs, and his sacrifice was now her strength. The tunnels were dark and endless, their walls dripping with cold water. The alien warrior carried Ethan deeper inside, every step echoing in the silence. Her wounds ached, her strength was fading, but she refused to stop. The human's faint breathing reminded her of the promise she had made. He would not die here. She lowered him gently onto a stone ledge, the dim light from the cracks above painting his face in pale silver. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath thin and weak. She pressed her hand to his ribs and felt the tremor of life still fighting within him. But it was slipping away, little by little. Her own chest tightened with guilt. He had given her air, given her his last breath. And now, he was drowning in emptiness. For the first time in her life, she wished she could give it back. But her lungs were her own now, alive because of him. The weight of that gift pressed heavily upon her soul. She searched through her broken armor for anything useful. Her fingers brushed against a vial, a healing serum of her people, meant only for warriors of her clan. It was sacred, rare, forbidden to use on outsiders. But as she stared at Ethan, pale and fading, the law of her people felt like dust. She uncorked the vial, the sharp scent filling the tunnel. Without hesitation, she pressed it to his lips. At first he did not move. Then, slowly, his throat tightened and he swallowed. His body shivered, his skin warming as the medicine flowed into him. The warrior leaned close, listening. His breaths grew steadier, though still shallow. Relief washed over her like fire after frost. When his eyes opened, even for a brief second, she felt her heart stop. They were clouded, weak, but alive. He looked at her, confusion flickering in his gaze. Why was he still breathing? Why was she there? His lips parted, his voice nothing but a whisper. "Why didn't you leave?" The words pierced her chest like a blade. She could not answer in his tongue, but the emotion was clear in her eyes. "Because you gave me life," she thought. "Because I cannot let your sacrifice be wasted. Because the price of humanity is now mine to carry." She placed a clawed hand over her chest, and then over his, a silent vow. Her glowing eyes softened, not with weakness, but with something stronger than pride. A bond she could not explain, but one she would not deny. The tunnels shook with distant blasts. The patrols were still searching. She knew they could not stay here, not for long. Ethan coughed, weak but alive. His gaze locked on hers, and for the first time, he did not see an enemy. He saw a protector, a warrior who had chosen him. The alien rose to her feet, her blade in hand, her voice steady though only she could hear it. "They will come," she whispered, "but they will not take you." She would pay the price of humanity with her own blood, if needed, because his sacrifice had changed her. Because the meaning of honor was no longer only her people's law. It was the life she carried in her arms. In the darkness of the tunnels, they rested for only a moment. But that moment was enough to carve a truth into stone. A truth that enemies could become more than enemies. That sacrifice could bridge the unbridgeable. And that one human's last breath had become more powerful than any weapon. The warrior prepared herself as footsteps echoed again in the distance. She tightened her grip on her blade and looked down at Ethan. His eyes closed again, but his chest still rose with life. Her heart whispered the vow once more. "You gave me your breath, human. Now I give you my strength." And with that vow, she stepped into the shadows of the tunnels, ready to fight. Not for victory, not for her people, not even for herself, but for him, because the price of humanity had been paid in sacrifice. And now it was hers to protect, until the last breath of her own. The tunnels stretched endlessly, dark veins beneath a dying world. The alien warrior pressed forward, her steps echoing softly as she carried Ethan deeper into the shadows. His weight pulled at her arms, but she refused to let go. Every faint breath he took reminded her of the vow she had made. He would live, even if she bled for it. But safety was still far away. Behind them, the voices of soldiers grew louder, their footsteps chasing through the tunnels. The enemy would not rest until all survivors were silenced. The warrior's claws tightened on her blade, her glowing eyes narrowing with resolve. This was no longer a battle for her people. This was her promise, paid in blood if needed. She set Ethan gently against the wall, his chest rising and falling slowly. She brushed his hair back from his pale forehead, a gesture she did not fully understand. Her people did not touch their enemies, yet her hands moved with care. "Stay," she whispered in her tongue, though she knew he could not hear. Then she stood, her armor cracked and stained, her blade gleaming faintly in the darkness. The first soldiers appeared at the edge of the tunnel, their lights cutting through the dark. They raised their weapons, their shouts echoing. The warrior did not hesitate. With a roar that shook the silence, she charged forward, her blade flashing like lightning. The first fell before he could fire, her strike clean and sharp. The second shot a beam of searing light that burned across her shoulder. Pain seared her flesh, but she did not slow. Her blade carved him down, sparks dancing as his armor split. The third soldier backed away, fear in his eyes. But fear would not save him. Her strike silenced him before his cry could reach the others. The tunnel fell silent again, but only for a moment. More voices echoed deeper in the shadows, more footsteps approaching. The warrior's chest rose heavily, her wounds bleeding freely. She pressed a hand to her side, warm blood staining her claws. But pain was nothing compared to her vow. She remembered Ethan's face as he gave her the mask, his whisper, live. She would live for him and fight for him. She returned to his side, kneeling. Her blood dripped onto the ground beside him, dark stains against the stone. Her strength was fading, yet her spirit blazed. She placed her hand over his chest again, feeling the fragile rhythm of his heart. "Your breath is mine, human," she whispered softly, "and my blood is yours." The tunnel roared again as another group appeared, heavier armed this time. The warrior stood once more, her legs trembling but unyielding. Every step she took toward them was a step away from her own survival. But she no longer cared. Her survival meant nothing if his life ended here. The clash was brutal. Beams of light tore the walls apart, her blade flashing in arcs of fury. Each cut she made was fueled not by hate, but by loyalty. Every cry of her enemies was drowned beneath the silent promise burning in her soul. Her blood spilled freely now, her body staggering with every strike. But she did not fall. She could not fall. When the last soldier dropped, the tunnel was soaked with silence again. Her breath came ragged, her vision blurred, her body weak. She leaned on her blade, the weapon trembling in her grip. Her armor hung in pieces, her wounds screaming for rest. But her eyes turned once more to the human slumped against the wall. And in that sight, she found strength again. She dragged herself back to him, her knees giving way as she collapsed beside him. Her blood dripped onto his torn uniform, staining him with the price she had paid. She rested her head briefly against the cold stone, her voice low but steady. "I promised, and I have not broken it," she whispered. Her glowing eyes dimmed, but the fire within them did not die. Ethan stirred faintly, his lips parting as if to speak. No words came, only a fragile breath. But that was enough. He was still alive. Her sacrifice had not been wasted. She leaned closer, her voice soft. "You breathe because of me now, just as I breathe because of you." Her hand brushed his arm, her claws careful, gentle. "We are bound, human, by breath and by blood." Outside the tunnels, the war still raged. But in this darkness, a different war was being fought. A war of survival, of loyalty, of sacrifice. And in this war, the alien warrior knew she would pay every price, spill every drop, because one human's gift had already changed her forever. And now, her promise would never be broken. The tunnels grew quieter with every passing step. The sounds of the soldiers faded. The clash of weapons became memory. Only the drip of water and the ragged breaths of two survivors filled the silence. The alien warrior staggered forward, her body torn, her armor shattered. Blood traced her path, but she did not falter. In her arms, Ethan Cross still breathed, fragile but alive. Every rise of his chest reminded her why she had not fallen. Every faint heartbeat was proof that her vow still held. At last, she reached a cavern where a faint light broke through the cracks above. The ruined surface was near, and with it, perhaps escape. She lowered Ethan gently onto the stone floor. Her claws brushed his cheek, his skin warmer now, the medicine she had given him still fighting for his life. He stirred, his eyes opening just enough to find hers. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. A human and an alien. Two enemies shaped by war, now bound by sacrifice. Ethan's lips parted, his voice soft. Why save me?" She could not speak his tongue, but she understood the question, and he understood the silence. Her eyes said everything his words could not. "Because you gave me breath, because you showed me humanity, because in saving me, you gave me a reason to fight beyond hatred." The cavern shook suddenly, a low rumble as patrol ships passed overhead. The war had not ended, not for their people, but something had ended here between them, and something greater had begun. The warrior rose unsteadily, her blade still in hand, her blood dripping onto the stone. She stood between Ethan and the world, her glowing eyes fierce even in exhaustion. If more enemies came, she would fight them. If death itself came, she would defy it. Because her life was no longer her own, it was theirs shared by one human breath. Ethan tried to lift his hand, his fingers trembling as they reached for hers. She took it gently, careful not to harm him with her claws. Their hands rested together in the dim light. Different shapes, different worlds, but united in that single touch. In that moment, the legend was born. Not of victory, not of conquest, but of sacrifice. A human soldier who gave his last breath to an alien warrior, and an alien warrior who gave her blood to keep him alive. The war outside would continue. Their people would still call each other enemies. But the truth lived here in the silence of the cavern. A truth that no battlefield could erase. That two lives, once meant to destroy each other, had instead chosen to protect. The warrior whispered in her tongue, her voice steady. "Your story will not die with you, human. If you fall, I will carry it. If you live, we will carry it together." Her vow echoed in the cavern, carried by the dripping walls. Ethan's eyes closed again, not in death but in fragile sleep, and she sat beside him, guarding him, her blade across her knees. Her wounds throbbed, her strength waned, but her spirit did not break. She had become more than a soldier of her people. She had become the guardian of a human's last gift. Above them, the stars burned faintly through the cracks of the ruined world. Two worlds divided, yet connected by a single act of mercy. The human who gave his last breath, the alien who swore to protect it with her blood. And so the legend began, a story whispered across camps, retold in hushed voices, of a battlefield where one human and one alien chose something greater than war. Not victory, not defeat, but humanity itself. For in the silence of destruction, they had created something new, a bond unbroken by hatred, stronger than steel. The legend of two worlds, born from one breath, carried in one promise, sealed in blood.